Hello, and welcome to today's conversation on crypto regulation from buyer beware to federal oversight. I'm Bennett Richardson, president of Protocol. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our partners at Anchorage Digital for helping us kick things off. At Protocol, we aim to arm you as decision makers in technology, business, and policy with actionable news and analysis to help you do your job. How do you regulate a $3 trillion industry? The present lack of comprehensive regulation in the cryptocurrency market leaves investors in digital assets vulnerable to fraud, manipulation, and abuse. Timely topic this week. Federal regulators and Congress are debating how to move forward, but partisan divides will make it hard to reach a consensus. The risk of misregulation is high, potentially stifling a growing industry and threatening the US dollar's global reserve status. Meanwhile, some industry leaders are hoping to make an end run around the SEC to form new oversight structures, while others insist that you can't be pro-regulation and pro-innovation at the same time. With 16% of Americans reporting that they've used cryptocurrencies, new regulation policies are inevitable. But where will we end up? In this event, we'll hear from Congressman Beyer and a panel of experts to explore what the future of crypto regulation will look like. We're so glad you could tune in today. If you're not already subscribed, don't forget to sign up for Protocol Fintech and Protocol's entire family of newsletters at protocol.com/newsletters. To get things started, I'm excited to bring up Georgia Quinn for a quick fireside chat on regulating the stablecoin ecosystem. Georgia is the general counsel of Anchorage Digital, a premier digital asset platform for institutions. She has extensive experience in capital markets, alternative finance, and digital assets, where she combines her passion for both securities law and technology. Welcome, Georgia.
Thank you so much, Bennett, and thank you to Protocol. It's really a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent.
So I wanted to start off kind of big picture on stablecoins. You know, the world's really focusing in on, these kind of partnership potential between China and Russia. And so obviously lots of different policy debates happening right now. Easy to sometimes lose sight of what seem to be more niche policy debates like stablecoin regulation. But tell us, why are stablecoins so important for US regulators to get right this year?
Oh boy, yeah, this is really an important one. So stable coins are not just a matter of like domestic financial policy and regulation. They are a matter of national security. To the extent that we can denominate the global currency in US dollars, it allows for the US hegemony, continues to allow the US to be the world's reserve currency, can bring financial stability around the globe, and really helps, all of these issues lead to our national security. So at Anchorage, we believe this is one of the most important areas that our government could be focusing on right now.
That's great. And I know that you obviously have lots of conversations with regulators. You've been a part of the president's working group. Looking into the future, tell us, what do you think a regulated, secure stablecoin ecosystem could look like?
Yeah, and exactly. Rubber hits the road, right? How are we going to do this? What are the steps we need to take? And being the first federally chartered digital asset bank, we're going to be the first to tell you we got to have rules. This can't just be some free-for-all. But we also can't stifle innovation and destroy the technology that is creating all of these wonderful benefits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the 6 points that we think are most important to keep in mind with respect to stablecoin and their regulation. So first of all, stablecoin should be backed one-for-one by the US dollar. This should be held in a transparent reserve in a FDIC insured institution. Now, importantly, what I just said was the reserves should be held in a federally registered and chartered institution, not the stablecoins themselves necessarily. And the issuer of the stablecoin should not be a bank. The issuer of the stablecoin should be a technology and security company, because ultimately stablecoins are not investments. Stablecoins are merely a technology layer that allows the fiat currency, whichever applicable currency we're talking about, in this case, US dollars, to be utilized in a digital ecosystem. Stablecoins are payment and settlement technologies and not investments. So, okay, let's go back to my point. Sorry, I got so excited, I forgot to enumerate. So number one, stablecoins must be one-for-one backed by US dollars. This eliminates the so-called run risk that's been presented by these wildcat banking papers. that's really a red herring, and it's caused to just get people nervous and just raise the anxiety levels. But having the assets backed one for one with US dollars eliminates any run risk. Sure, run to the bank, redeem it, get your dollar back. No big whoop. Okay, number 2. Stablecoins, not investments. They are merely payment and settlement instruments to take our finances into the digital realm, where we have lower transaction costs, faster transaction time, 24/7 availability. Number 3, AML KYC. As I mentioned, we're a federally chartered bank. We believe in AML KYC, and it must be conducted at the on and off ramps. But once within the digital ecosystem, we can allow for the free transmission of these assets so that they can operate to their utmost potential. Number 4, the tech should be provided by a tech provider and not a bank. As much as I love banks, they do not have a good history in the provision and creation of technology. So let's bifurcate these jobs and let the people that are really great at developing the tech and the security, which is of utmost importance, handle that, and let the banks custody the reserves, which they have done for centuries. Number 5, maintaining the reserves in US dollars and allowing US dollars to be the stable coin of choice will maintain, and I mentioned this before, US hegemony. It will allow the United States to have ultra-jurisdictional reach in global markets and ultimately, my point number 6, in global security. And if we can maintain stable financial markets, and if we can maintain integrity in the transmission and payment networks that are utilized globally, that's a real, huge step in protecting the national security and global security of our country.
Thank you. That was super interesting, and you've given a lot of great points there. I'm sure our panel will have some reactions to that in a minute here. Thank you so much, Georgia. Fascinating insights. Really appreciate you kicking things off and having Anchorage here partnering with us on today's event.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Of course. So now, folks, before we bring up our panel, I'm excited to share with you a Protocol exclusive. It's a fireside chat with Congressman Beyer and Protocol Senior FinTech reporter Ben Pimentel. We recorded this yesterday while Congressman Beyer was on the House floor for votes, so you will hear some background noise, but I promise it's worth it. So we'll go now to our conversation with Congressman Beyer, and then we'll bring up our panel.
Welcome everyone to this protocol conversation. Our special guest today is Representative Beyer of Virginia, who last year introduced a bill that would create a broad framework for regulators.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be with you here on Protocol.
So let's get started on the main topic of the day. What led you to look into crypto, and what do you hope to accomplish with this bill?
Well, I have, like most Americans, I've been hearing about crypto for a number of years now. There's even a fellow businessman I know here in Northern Virginia who's somehow acquired something like $6 billion of Bitcoin. So I've always been interested in it, but there's actually a very talented DC attorney who spent many years in the Treasury Department who came to me a year or two ago and said, we really need a comprehensive crypto bill on regulation. There's so much good and there's so much bad going on with crypto right now. Let's put together some comprehensive initial bill, humbly, not expecting it will be the final product, but let's get the conversation going. So we've done that, and it's gotten a lot of attention, and hopefully it started a lot of conversation about what comes next.
I guess before we go into the details, are you invested in crypto? Do you own any tokens?
No. While I've been tempted, I think I don't want to do anything to compromise my ability to lead on this. So, no, everything's nothing's in crypto.
One key issue is the debate over whether some cryptocurrency should actually be considered securities and therefore, be considered investment contracts that are subject to regulatory scrutiny. What are some of as you prepare this bill, what are some of your thoughts on that issue?
Well, I think, Ben, we really think all cryptocurrencies should be regulated. So then the question is, what are securities? What are commodities? Is there a third category? We went back to the Dodd-Frank bill coming out of 2010, 2011, and looked at how they treated swaps and basically said, look, if it's a security, then it should be regulated by the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission. And if it's a commodity, right now, Bitcoin, Ether are both considered commodities. It should be regulated by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, CFTC. And so that's the way our bill is written. I think it's generally, that idea is pretty well accepted in the marketplace. I don't know that it's completely accepted by the SEC or the CFTC yet, but and there has been push. Right now, the SEC doesn't have a lot of formal authority, but Gary Gensler, its very competent and very aggressive chief, has been trying to regulate stuff, whether it's commodity or security, just because he thinks it needs regulation. We're not trying to take away any power from him at all. But we just figured if we make the law clear on what's a commodity, what's a security, it'll be a lot easier to get, especially for people that have new ideas, new products they want to create, that they know exactly where to place them.
What are some of the insights that have been shared by Chair Gensler, given that, of course, he has testified a few times in Congress, in terms of his thinking into whether some cryptocurrencies should be considered commodities or securities, given that that's been the main complaint, I guess, that I've heard from the industry, that it's just simply not clear.
Yeah, and I hope that we can make it clear. I've not talked to Chairman Gensler yet. I talked to Chairman Bennett already over CFTC. He seemed to have a very clear idea that commodities should be in the CFTC's realm. And he looked and said, he talked about commodities as a bushel of corn or, a barrel of oil, something that's a commodity. That's a bushel of corn is a bushel of corn almost anywhere. Similarly, so much Bitcoin or so much Ether also right now are commodities. When you securitize them, when you start to do tricky things like swaps and the like, then it gets to be much more security, and it really needs to move over to the SEC. So we're hoping that the legislation will make that clear. And right now, we're trying to move forward on the House Agriculture Committee. There are initiatives in the Senate Agriculture Committee that will really embrace this commodity perspective.
Your proposal also includes giving the Federal Reserve the authority to create the digital dollar, which, of course, is getting the industry excited a lot. But there are also privacy concerns that have come up, especially given the way, the perception of China with its digital yuan exercises a lot of control and is used currency as a form of surveillance. What are some of your thoughts in terms of addressing these?
Well, we've been first trying to be responsive to Chairman Powell and what he might want. So part of our bill is to authorize the creation of a central bank digital currency. Doesn't mandate it. I think at this point, I defer to people smarter than I am who've been managing central bank currencies for a long time about when we move in that direction. But given that so much of the rest of the world is doing it, including China, it seems silly not to have that power. I also know that we have a lot of concerns about the fiat currencies. U.S. Tether is one of the biggest concerns, where perhaps only 10 or 20% of their outstandings are actually backed by real cash. And the concern there is if we don't regulate the alternatives to a central bank digital currency, and if we don't perhaps move in the direction of doing something that is very well run by the federal government, that we're going to get caught flat-footed. And obviously, one of the biggest concerns we have is fraud. That's every day there's yet another currency hack. So the notion of if you're going to do this is going to be a big part of our economy moving forward. Why not have the absolute gold standard, platinum standard, be the Fed's central bank digital currency?
Another issue that erupted last year was the infrastructure bill, which contained language that many industry fear means that developers, miners, node operators, and others who are involved in maintaining a blockchain network or creating a blockchain network will have to pay taxes or report activity that would involve paying taxes. The industry failed to. I guess there was an attempt to modify that language, but that failed. Where are we there now, and what are some of your thoughts on this controversy?
Well, I think we need to do something. We didn't really weigh in on the two sides in the Senate, which were, both of them were bipartisan sides. I think one of the more interesting perspectives is from Susan Bennett, who's the former Microsoft exec, member of Congress from Seattle, who has essentially a de minimis bill. Says if the crypto transactions are below a certain level, no taxes, don't have to worry about it. If it starts to get significant, then yes, there's probably going to be a need to declare taxes. Obviously, one of the reasons for regulation is we don't want crypto to be the new way that people avoid paying legitimately due taxes on their earnings.
There have been reports that the Biden administration is planning to eventually weigh in, maybe with an executive order on this issue, on crypto regulation. Any insight into that, on whether that's going to happen soon?
No, I don't. We've heard the same rumors. And of course, they're welcome. If they do an executive order, obviously it leaps ahead of Congress. But I don't think it will ever replace, good, thoughtful congressional legislation passed by both houses, passed by both parties, signed by a U.S. president. We're still going to need to do that. If there's an executive order, it just means that there will be a little more attention, a little more regulation paid right away. Whereas, as we all know, things move through Congress slowly.
What is the biggest hurdle currently in what you're trying to accomplish in terms of having a bill that regulates this new fast-moving technology?
I hope this sounds appropriately respectful of my colleagues, but a lot of people are just mystified by it. They may be able to spell crypto, but that's about it. And I would say that, I don't want to exaggerate, but maybe 90% of the members of Congress are in that position. And by the way, I don't hold myself out to be some expert. It's just, they don't own crypto. It's difficult stuff. I mean, just explaining blockchain, there probably are only 5 or 6 people in Congress who could give you an accurate explanation of how blockchain works. So bringing people up to speed so that they feel comfortable legislating on it is a big deal. And we had a big Joint Economic Committee hearing on crypto that had a lot of attention. And we need to do many more across different committees so that people say, okay, I understand this, I get this, I know why we have to regulate it, I know the most sensible way to do it because I've heard the alternatives.
Can you share maybe a little bit about your own journey in terms of trying to understand it? And how did you, even for reporters, it's been hard to, challenging to understand the technology that is moving so fast, but it also is so technical.
Yeah, there's so many pieces of it. I was in Davos maybe 4 years ago when every storefront on the main drag had a big sign in it about blockchain. As we sort of discovered, oh my goodness, we can create permanent records that are transparent and can't be changed. And what a wonderful way to move the world forward. In the meantime, people have found an awful lot of ways to do blockchain that you can't see. And people have found amazing ways to hack these different cryptocurrencies. Every day, there's yet another hack that creates lots and lots of negative runoff. And then my friends will always send me the new quantum computing story about how soon quantum computing will be able to break blockchain. We live in a brave new world. And keeping up with all of it is important. My friend Bill Foster, who's a PhD physicist and member of Congress from Illinois, is pushing hard for literally a digital signature per American citizen that would attach to their digital assets, and not just cryptos, but NFTs and everything else. There's a parallel idea that we should, so much of our information now is being sold, not just our medical information and our genetic information, but our buying habits and what magazines we subscribe to and what websites we've gone to, that with blockchain and with our own personal digital signature, we may be able to monetize that rather than letting Facebook make all the money off of our information.
at least a couple of industry leaders have actually told me they compare this to the dot-com boom in the 90s. When the Clinton administration essentially stepped in and said, hey, this technology can be transformational. So we need to make sure that we understand its strategic consequences of regulating it or supporting it. Some are saying President Biden should do the same thing. That is where we are now. That the president and that the White House should step in and make some kind of statement on how the technology is really just transformational in many ways. What do you think of it?
I think so. There's a wonderful bipartisan nonprofit in Northern Virginia that just sent off a big letter on exactly that point to the White House, that these, I think that they called them transformational technologies, but really thinking, long term, not about stuff that's already on our desktop now, but what will be there in 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, that we invest deeply in those. For example, just switching to healthcare for a second, CRISPR is one of those absolutely transformational technologies that will change the quality of our lives forever. We need to be getting way ahead of that and investing in it big time. The Competes Act, which passed the House last Friday and will pass the Senate in some form in the next couple of weeks, biggest investment in basic research in American history, with a heavy emphasis on translation into actual products, engineering, manufacturing. These are, it's hard to imagine, but more exciting times to be part of America. Bennett keeps saying, despite 3/4 of Americans thinking America's on the wrong track, our best days lie ahead. And all this happening in the AI space and the crypto space and even in digital is going to lead us there.
Congressman, what is your biggest worry when it comes to crypto? What keeps you up at night?
Oh, we're having trouble getting the climate change commitments met. The biggest part of the Build Back Better bill, which has yet to pass, is $555 billion to keep the commitments that we made in Paris, or actually in Glasgow, in the summertime. If we did all that, along with the other nations, we'd be down to 1.7 degrees centigrade, from 1900 to 2050. That's only 2/10 above where we want it to be. And we can find the other 2/10. But if we don't pass that, a world that's slowly getting hotter and hotter, and people moving, and diseases, vectors are changing, and it's gonna put a real crank in all the other good things that we're trying to do going forward.
But what about just on crypto itself, in terms of how clearly it's disrupting and upending the financial system, not just in the U.S. but
I would love for our governmental leaders in Congress, the White House, and everywhere else, and in the other nations too, to stay ahead of the criminals. We had a very, I shouldn't be smiling, but this morning we had a very sad Science Committee hearing on human trafficking, and discovered that most of the human trafficking right now in America is being paid for with crypto. And that's really damning. That it isn't dollars going back and forth, or even guns or heroin now. It's crypto. So unless we figure out how best to regulate this, it's not just the human traffickers, which may be the saddest part, but drugs and guns and international criminal enterprises and rogue nations, and then just basically plain naive investors who lose everything because they put it in the wrong currency.
Congressman Beyer, thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Ben, thanks for all the hard questions, and good luck.
Thank you, sir. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We continue our conversation about crypto regulations with 3 speakers, each of whom I've had the pleasure of interviewing in the past. We have Kristin Smith, Executive Director of the Blockchain Association, and which is considered the leading lobby organization for the industry. Cathy Yoon is General Counsel for INX, a blockchain-based service for trading cryptocurrencies and digital assets. And Steve Diamond is a professor at Santa Clara University School of Law and a veteran observer of the tech industry and Silicon Valley. Welcome to the 3 of you.
Morning, Ben.
Congressman Beyer talked about his proposals for regulating crypto. This year is expected to be the year in which debates over crypto regulations are expected to heat up. What are your predictions? Let's start with Kristin.
Yeah, no, certainly appreciate Congressman Beyer's interest in this space. And I would have to say, though, there are a few ideas in his bill we don't agree with, but I think that's okay, right? This is 2022 for Congress should be the year of putting out ideas and proposals and thinking through what should regulation look like, where do we need regulation? Because we don't need regulation for regulation's sake. What we want are rules where there are risks in the places otherwise identify. And I think that given that the crypto space is so fast moving and changes are happening all the time, and models for how to deploy new networks are changing all the time, that it's really beneficial to take a step back, do some education, and figure out where's the space going and what makes sense, so that we don't stifle something in the kind of innovative stage that we're in right now. But I do think that we might see a little bit of action and attention out of the White House, which I think could be a very positive thing. It shows that the space is growing and priority. And we may see some action on the regulatory front, but I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of progress in Congress this year.
Can you maybe mention the most the point that's sort of prominent in terms of your opposition to the bill, the thing that you're most critical of?
Yeah, well, listen, I think there's some good ideas in the bill, right? I think Representative Beyer's bill talks about having the CFTC as potentially a regulatory home for the regulation of crypto spot exchanges. That's not necessarily a bad idea. That's one we've seen in other bills, like the Digital Commodity Exchange Act, and there's been a lot of discussion about expanding the CFTC's authority over this space. There are other provisions, though, that would be quite troubling. I mean, at the beginning, we heard Georgia Quinn talk about the idea that you want technological specialists to be custodians of stablecoins. We're also today looking at who are the issuers of stablecoins, and when we move forward, we don't necessarily want all stablecoin issuers to be banks, right? And this was yesterday. So Beyer's bill would only allow Treasury to have to. We don't think that innovators should be going to the government to ask permission for these types of things. We do think there needs to be some guardrails, which I echo all of those that Georgia Quinn spoke about earlier. But to have to get permission from the government first, I think would be a problematic step. There's also some language in there on anti-money laundering that would be problematic for the DeFi ecosystem. I think DeFi is in the very early stages today. It has a tremendous amount of potential for mainstream consumers. There's also a lot of problems that we see getting access to financial services today. So again, this is not something people are using today, but in the future, DeFi, I think, is going to be what brings the underbanked into the financial services system, and we want to support that. So those are provisions that DeFi-related ones of stablecoins that we find problematic in the Beyer bill.
Cathy, what are your predictions? We talked about this, but yeah, maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to the interview, with Beyers, and I think it's great that we have members of Congress who are trying to speak about this. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of education, in terms of what exactly people are talking about. I think we have a long road ahead in making sure that when especially members of government are using certain terms like digital assets and crypto and stuff like that, we know exactly what they're referring to. And I think that's a criticism that I have for us who are in the space, who are living the space. I think we need to do a better job in terms of being more clear in terms of the definitions, what we're talking about. I think I disagree that all digital assets or all tokens need to be regulated. And I think this goes back to the specific terms and what we're talking about. And so I'm hoping in terms of predictions that this year, while we probably won't see a lot of movement in terms of actual legislation, but I do hope we will see better education and people actually trying to understand the terms. I don't think the technology really needs to be fully understood. And I think that's a criticism. People, other than knowing how to spell crypto, they don't know what it is. I think this kind of goes back to too much emphasis and focus on the tech stack itself, as opposed to a lot of the solutions that this technology and other types of technology can bring. You know, Ben and you and I spoke about this, just kind of my own journey with banking and how we kind of went from going to tellers all the time with a bank book and then getting ATM cards and mobile banking. I don't think any of us really understand the technology that goes behind a mobile banking app, but we use it and we accept it. And I think it just needs to get to the point where people just accept the solutions without trying to dig deeper into the tech stack.
And Steve, longtime observer of Silicon Valley, I know you have a lot of great views on this. What is your prediction?
Well, I don't have a prediction.
Okay.
I have a choice. We're on the Titanic, and the question is whether or not we can see the iceberg or whether we're still far enough away to avoid the iceberg. You've titled today's event regulating a $3 trillion industry. I think you now know it's a $1.5 trillion industry now. And that is precisely the problem. This is an unstable environment filled with fraudulent bad actors. Congress and regulators may be doing too little, too late. Let's keep in mind that every one of the features of this environment is already subject to regulation. We have a very robust administrative state that's been in place since the Great Depression. And if we don't use it appropriately in this environment, use the tools at hand already available to that administrative state, we could be looking at an event that makes the Great Depression look small. There is a systemic risk here. And this is the fundamental point that the Presidential Working Group has just made to Congress very clearly. And it apparently was missed by your first guest, Ms. Quinn, who tried to poo-poo the notion that there's any risk of a run on the bank, so to speak. That's precisely the central risk identified by the Presidential Working Group. And it's why they identified the possibility of the government exercising its authorities to declare stablecoin and other similar type entities or linked entities to be either financial utilities or systemically important financial institutions, which would allow regulators to begin to get their hands around this beast. I think we're also in what I would call the mania phase. So the economic historian, great economic historian Charles Kinderberger, wrote a famous book that everyone ought to read now, or reread, Manias, Panics, and Crashes. And we're in the mania phase. And as just an example of the mania phase, here is one of the great crypto bulls, Michael Saylor of MicroStrategy. Bitcoin is a swarm of cyber hornets serving the goddess of wisdom, feeding on the fire of truth, exponentially growing ever smarter, faster, and stronger behind a wall of encrypted energy. That is a mania, or the statement of a mania phase. The next phase will be panic, and then there will be a crash. Now, regulators are in a very tough spot. They can regulate now and take the risk that this comes crashing down, or they can wait until all the victims of the crash are banging down the doors of Congress, demanding to be told, why didn't you warn us? And that's the tension we're dealing with today.
Okay, Kristin was reacting, so I'm gonna let you.
I react to everything. Yeah, listen, I mean, I think that there are a lot of people out there that crypto has been a wonderful investment. For me, I think, and for those of us who are working and building every day in this industry, this is really about creating a new infrastructure. This is about deploying networks that are resilient, that are uncensorable, that can support a whole range of services that have not come online yet, right? I mean, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of work going on in the DeFi space. There's a lot of potential to speed up the way we trade real world assets today or securities using this technology. But there's also a lot of work going on to rebuild our internet infrastructure in a way that is gives consumers much more control over their information and the ability to monetize their own content that doesn't exist today with the big tech platforms. So this is the early stages, and nobody is by any means saying this is the final stage. I agree we want to get all of the fraud out of this system. That doesn't help. But that doesn't mean there aren't really good ideas that are going to be game-changing and improve people's lives. And so, I think it's important that congressmen and regulators and others in a position to make policy are taking the time to learn about this. And, we do our best here at the Blockchain Association to be a resource. There's always much more work that needs to be done, right? You have new people coming in every day. I mean, heck, I run this, I do this all day long, and there's news that I can't keep up with sometimes because the pace is so fast. So, we're trying to boil it down and make it accessible for people. But, I don't think the government needs to go around telling consumers what to innovate in and what to invest in or what not, right? I mean, I think that people should be aware that if they are investing, this is a volatile asset class. But that's okay. Like, it's early stages. I think over time, that may change. And, there are a lot of people that have had success in this space. So I think in a world where you can't get a whole lot of money out of having your funds in a savings account, you've got inflation at record levels, people are looking for different options. And I think crypto is a solution to many different problems out there, but it is a solution that is in the incredible early stages in the scheme of things, and one that I think is going to continue to be more consumer and user friendly over time.
I want to ask Cathy, having come from Wall Street, from traditional finance, and having lived through, a major crash, which is the recession more than a decade ago, talk about, what is your reaction to what Steve explained, and maybe how did you become more comfortable with this industry, with this technology?
I mean, I think it's a little myopic to look at the aspects that may be manic or the things that catch the press's attention. If you look at the traditional financial services, ecosystem and what's going on there with all of the intermediaries that are regulated with all the rules and regulations that there are, you're still not looking at a system that is completely fraud-free or free from money laundering or, free from all these different things. And I think to highlight this technology as kind of being this microcosm of where only bad things happen is, to me, I think it's an irresponsible way of looking at things. I don't think we have a counter right now in the more traditional, maybe antiquated sense of how things are done, where it serves as the cleanest model. And we're always going to have innovative technology, unless meteor hits, the world and we lose everything and no one is able to do anything. It's not just going to be cryptocurrency. It's not just going to be blockchain. We're always innovating. We're always doing different things. Who's to say that while under lockdown starting in March 2020, that you have some brilliant person who sat in their parents' basement coming up with something new. And I think if we're going to have this like gut reaction that this type of technology is terrible, well, how are we going to act when there's something new that comes along and we haven't learned to look at this, with a broader scope?
Let me pick up on that point, and this question is for Steve. You've been critical of crypto, but the trend is getting stronger. And then a lot of people have compared this to the dot-com era with the rise of the web, where there were also a lot of skepticism about some of the changes there, but they have thrived and they have developed. What lessons from the way the web grew and evolved should be top of mind in your view?
Well, first, let me just address Cathy's suggestion that I'm being irresponsible. I'm simply explaining to your audience the core message that came from the presidential working group appointed by President Biden to study this sector in depth, and its now new report on stablecoin and the need for regulation. It's the presidential working group that made a primary concern the possibility of a run on the bank, where there will not be enough assets to protect people who are trying to get out for the exits. And all it requires is somebody yell fire in a crowded theater, people go for the exits. We had the example of Tether in New York State, and Tether can no longer do business in New York State because the New York Attorney General accused them and settled on fraud charges under the very powerful state-level Martin Act, another source of regulatory authority at the state level. I noticed, for example, in Congress, one of the dividing lines is between whether we will have a more robust federal system or state-level system. We already have a pretty robust state-level system. So I'd appreciate it if Ms. Yoon would direct her comments to the Presidential Working Group about who's being responsible or not. Now, with respect to the dot-com era, yes, I lived through it. I was a practicing attorney at the time. And let's just keep in mind the scale of what we're talking about here is far, far greater. The threat is far more significant. Don't kid yourselves. The United States government is not going to let stablecoins displace the centrality of the US dollar. And I think, again, a key point of the Presidential Working Group is they are obviously very concerned about essentially the ideological drive here, sort of the libertarian, pure free market, deregulated environmental drive here to essentially disrupt, if you want to say, inherit from the dot-com era, disrupt the US dollar. And they're not going to let that happen. Now, I will concede to both of my fellow guests on the panel that there is an innovation of some value, uncertain, to blockchain technology, which of course is separate and apart from the broader environment of Bitcoin, stablecoins, initial coin offerings, and the plethora of other kinds of pseudo innovations. But blockchain technology has been around for decades. And it's now, maybe because of advanced computer power and other interesting concerns, we can have permission-based, trust-based, centralized systems that use, a sophisticated version of QuickBooks to provide some efficiencies. But that's not the problem, right? The problem isn't that Walmart is using some form of a blockchain internally to communicate along its supply chain with suppliers of food products to ensure that it gets fresh goods into its stores on time, right? That's an inventory management system. And I think that's an important innovation. And fine, fund that, allow innovation, et cetera, in that setting. But of course, that's not where the concern is. And I think your guests on the panel know this. And clearly, Congressman Beyer knows that.
Cathy, you want to respond?
I don't.
Were you calling me irresponsible, or are you just calling the Presidential Working Group irresponsible?
I just think that if
I'd like an apology, frankly. I really don't see any point in throwing on.
I meant it as a more of a general irresponsibility in not seeing it and focusing on certain aspects that highlight the worst in all of humanity in terms of wanting to defraud and other things. But I do think it's responsible, and this is just generally not directed at you or the Presidential Working Group or anything like that, that if we keep on focusing on how things are always done, and instead of looking to the future and what innovation can do and help and allow us to transact, in more transparent ways, to name one reason, I do think that it is a little irresponsible not to see the benefits that DLT or blockchain technology or even what cryptocurrency.
Walmart has an innovation in its food supply chain management system. Nobody's talking about that in Congress. You know that. Why don't we focus on what Congress is talking about? I thought that's what we're here to talk about.
Well, I have some thoughts on that, though. I mean, I think if you look at what the President's Working Group suggested, they had some ideas, they had some thoughts, they expressed some concerns, but what they wanted was for Congress to weigh in on this subject. And there's going to be another hearing on the stablecoin issue before the Senate Banking Committee hearing, I believe next week. But if you look at the hearing that was held yesterday, there was a lot of different thoughts on both sides of the aisle about how to proceed. And I think it was pretty clear that everyone agrees that we don't necessarily need these issuers of stablecoins to be banks. We do want transparency and audits around what the reserves look like. I mean, I think that's very clear. And I agree that Tether has had a problematic history and that there are a lot of questions there. And I think that regulators should put a path forward. The run risk on stablecoins should not be a risk if they're done correctly, right? So with stablecoin reserves, unlike with traditional banking, it is not a fractional reserve system. It's supposed to be a fully reserved system where a vast majority of the dollars are in dollars, and then there's a small percent in treasuries. If this is actually done correctly and there's audits in place and that money is in a segregated account, there is no risk on the run of a bank because it's a fully reserved system, right? It's a different type of idea. And so I think that it's important that Congress is looking at this. But I do think that the president's working group was very clear that Congress had a role to play in this, and they're working through that role right now. And that new information and new ideas, I think, are coming to light in how best to do this. But my takeaway from that hearing yesterday is there was not consensus that all of these entities needed to be a bank, that there was room to do this in a way that would allow different types of models to emerge over time.
All right, I promise a lively and engaging conversation, and we're definitely having that. So thank you all. Let's move to a subject that's also become talked about a lot: the role of the SEC in the debates over regulations. When Gary Gensler was appointed last year, there was a lot of excitement, even within the industry, because here's someone who actually taught and understands blockchain and crypto. But of course, those views have changed. How would you evaluate or assess the role that Chair Gensler has played over the past year? Steve?
Yeah, so obviously, Chair Gensler has a strong personal interest in crypto. He taught an entire course on it at MIT when he was out of government. He's made this very clear. If you listen carefully, as I have, to his MIT lectures, he's essentially in a sort of centrist position. He would wax and wane as the semester went on between what he called a maximalist position, meaning kind of a Bitcoin bull, or a crypto bull, and a minimalist position where you think there's basically no value to this at all. That may have been for political posturing. He wanted to get appointed, and he had to get through the Senate. And obviously, among the Republicans, there's strong opposition to increased federal regulation, et cetera. But I've been personally just reasonably pleased that I think he's defending the authorities that the SEC has had since 1934, and the definitions within the major statutes are crystal clear. I've encountered any number of crypto participants who profess that they don't understand the definitions, that the Howey test isn't clear, the Supreme Court doesn't speak clearly. This is absurd. The definition of security has been crystal clear for many decades. It's purposely set up to be flexible. It obviously applies across a large swath of the crypto environment, and even technically, possibly to Bitcoin itself. So number one, he has the authorities I think he needs to go after this sector aggressively. And in my view, all crypto assets fall into one of three categories: the entire digital asset environment. Either they are deposits, in which case you have banking regulators at the state and federal level. They are securities, in which case you have securities regulators, again at the state and federal level. Or they are commodities, in which case you have the CFTC. So there is, again, a robust set of definitional concepts that already exist in the administrative state. And the SEC is perhaps, I don't think the SEC in the current environment is the critical player, because the banking setting and the threat to the hegemony of the US dollar. I mean, look, the chances that the US is going to allow stablecoins and the private sector to eat away at dollar hegemony is like thinking that Putin is going to give up Ukraine to NATO. It's just not going to happen, folks. So the industry ought to get real about this. Obviously, they're trying to chip away and sort of shift things to the state or come up with new legislation that would essentially weaken these authorities. And I'm pretty sure the agencies will withstand that, and they'll use their existing authorities.
Cathy?
Yeah,
Gensler and the
the thing is that you're right. There are existing rules and regulations, and I don't think anyone is saying that we shouldn't follow any of them. I think people have taken some of my recent remarks to say that there are no rules or regulations and that we have to make things up as we go along. That's not it. I think obviously there are where KYC and AML are very important. And there's a prescribed way of going about onboarding properly customers, and we follow them. And I don't think we're saying that those should change. When it comes to the Howey test, I think yes, it was a test that everyone understood. It has its 4 prongs, and you go about and analyzing it on a facts and circumstances basis. Unfortunately, the SEC a few years ago came out with a framework that added something like 52 factors that they also considered. They didn't really give guidance on how it plays in with the Howey test. They didn't give guidance on how each of those factors were weighed, if one had more weight than another. So I think you took a very simple test and muddied the waters and didn't give further guidance on how those other factors played along in this well-established test. So I think it's you're taking established rules and regulations, and unfortunately it's throwing monkey wrenches into them, and that's where people are saying that there's a lack of clarity. It's not in the existing rules and regulations, but in terms of some of the interpretations that have come out. And it seems like, it always seems like there's a different agenda when it comes to crypto and blockchain.
And Kristin, what has been the experience of the Blockchain Association in dealing with the SEC and maybe even other regulators? How, in terms of comparing the SEC to others?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that with this current SEC, the industry shares some common goals, right? We care very much about market integrity and consumer protection. We agree with that. But, as Cathy was alluding to, there are very few other jurisdictions around the globe that have an investment contract, which is what the Howey test tries to define, in their definition of security. And so other countries have been able to move forward with finding regulation in the digital asset space much easier because of this really open-ended facts and circumstances test. And for those of us working in the industry, they want to participate in building new networks where all of these different people are coming together to create something valuable and build services on top of them. And this is just fundamentally different way of organizing economic activity than we see with like a particular company where there's information that is different. And so I think it's important for investors to understand what it is they're investing in. I think that we could find a better way to make sure that there are disclosures available. Now, most of this information is out there, right? When you invest in Facebook or Google, you can't go in and look at their code base to see how they do what they do. With these crypto networks, those are open and you can. And so it's trying to figure out what kind of information is available to investors, and then what's the right type of regulator. We think that there's a way that probably could work within the SEC, but it might not be that the SEC is the best home for this, right? Because the SEC is an information asymmetry regulator. This is a situation where there isn't as much information asymmetry because there's so much that's publicly available and publicly disclosed. And so I think it's important to have a debate around this. But from our perspective at the Blockchain Association, there is no clear regulator of the spot market. And there's no clear guidance that shows that a lot of these crypto projects that Gary Gensler, seems to think are issuing unregistered securities are. We differ. And there are a lot of I'm not a lawyer, but there are a lot of incredibly smart and talented lawyers that are looking at this in this space. And there is, there is some clarity that I think we could potentially seek going forward, or do what Commissioner Hester Peirce suggested and have a safe harbor period where you have these very specialized disclosures that make sense for understanding what the network is, right? And so, we would like to see, I think, a little bit more sort of open dialogue with the SEC than perhaps we've had. But, I think that these are issues that inevitably Congress is going to have to get involved in. And, it's at a phase right now where it's idea generation phase and education phase, right? I don't think we're seeing, as I mentioned before, any action out of Congress this year. So, but it is good to highlight what's happening, what the concerns are, and I think ultimately this could lead to a really good outcome. But the key is you have to have an open process. You have to have all stakeholders at the table, and you have to have discussions to figure out, what needs to be done and what's the right path forward.
Okay, we have time for one last round. I'm going to fold two of my questions into one. I'm going to ask you all, each of you, what I asked the Congressman. What are you most worried about in crypto? And also maybe comment on, you talked about the debate, Kristin, and this debate is playing out on Twitter. Very public. Sometimes the language is really harsh. Steve has been blocked by Mark Andreessen, which means good company together with Jack Dorsey, right, Steve?
Sure.
Let's start with you. What are you most worried about, and what can you say about the way this issue is being discussed and debated in social media?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Jack Dorsey. I'm sure he'll block me next. So he's backing a congressional primary challenge to Congressman Brad Sherman in Southern California because Congressman Sherman wants to enforce the existing law around crypto. And he's backing a sort of pseudo left-wing candidate who claims that you can use Bitcoin as both a savings vehicle to generate wealth for people who are very low income and as a source of universal basic income for those same folks. So they're supposed to save and spend the crypto at the same time. Where homeless people are supposed to keep crypto, I don't know, but that's who Jack Dorsey is now backing and using Twitter as a platform. So that I'm not worried that the next stage in this lobbying juggernaut backed by people like Andreessen and Dorsey will not focus on the relatively limited but important technological value of blockchain technology, but will instead focus on stoking this speculative mania, assuming that you can kind of get out at the top before it all crashes. And now this is bleeding into the political arena. And that's where I fear that this kind of lobbying effort, which pretends that the law isn't what it is, or that it isn't clear, or that people just don't understand, is an attempt really to weaken the existing standards that we already have.
Cathy?
So the question was, what worries me about
Crypto?
the perception?
I checked your Twitter account, so you're not that involved in the heated debates, but comment on the way it's being discussed in social media in the open.
Listen, I think it should be discussed. And yes, you're always going to get people who have very, very strong views. I'm not saying that every crypto proponent is smart about their arguments either. I'm not saying that, everyone needs education, even people who are involved in this space, right? And I just going back to my earlier comments, we need to be more clear in terms of what exactly we're talking about, and kind of not throwing these generalized terms out there and not making it more clear. But at the same time, I think people who do their homework, who want to learn and who kind of see through the noise will also see that there are certain voices or organizations or people who are on social media who have a more common sense approach to things, and who can be enlightening. And I think I would say that there's more positive than not, but maybe it's also because of the people I actively follow. And I think they're smart and terrific, and they add a lot of value and benefit.
And Kristin, you told me before that there have been meetings where people actually with members of government who would show a tweet or
yes. Yeah, no, policymakers are watching. And listen, the crypto community, the ecosystem, the people that are building in this space, including the industry, but other individuals, are incredibly passionate about the work they do. And the users of this are passionate about it because they feel like there have been many instances in the past years and past decades where large institutions, whether they be large tech platforms, whether they be the banks, have failed people. And for the first time, there's now a technology that can be the foundation for building solutions that return power and sovereignty back to the hands of the people. Like, this is a really big deal, and people get really passionate about it. And I think it's actually really great that this is playing out on Twitter. I think it's an incredibly effective grassroots tool. I mean, you can get, congressmen don't necessarily pick up the phone in their office or read the emails coming in, but they all look at their Twitter followers every day and what people are talking about. And so it's been a really great way to show members of Congress and regulators that the crypto industry cares. Yes, I agree. There are always some that are taking it too far. I think people should keep it classy and keep it constructive. But, that being said, people can express themselves. And when they're passionate about something that's this exciting and revolutionary that they get to be a part of from the ground up, like, it doesn't surprise me that people get upset when folks try to come in and destroy the very thing that they feel is providing them so much value.
On that note, thank you very much, Steve Diamond of the Santa Clara University School of Law, Cathy, Yoon of INX, Kristin Smith of Blockchain Association. And thank you, everyone, for joining us in this engaging conversation. Hope you learned a lot from it and enjoyed it. And thank you to people in the background who's running this event.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.